Ladies and gentlemen, at last I present to you the theatrical cut review for the one and only Rambo First Blood 1982 feature film. So, thank you for tuning in to our exclusive 7-part season finale. RAMBOMANIA would just not be the same without you. So without further ado, let's begin. So Jerry Goldsmith's timeless score brings us into the film, and we meet Rambo John Jay hiking down a rustic path to the Delmore Berry home. And Barry is a former member of his Baker team, and the only other survivor of the team as well. And he's invited John to stay with him after he makes it back stateside from Vietnam. So we meet Barry's wife and daughter, and it seems Rambo is very excited and charmed in the way about this. Until he is informed, however, at the Barry residence that Delmore has died recently from his exposures to Agent Orange back in Nam. I remember this haunting me as a kid because they say that, Rambo says that, Delmore was such a big guy, and then his wife, states that in the end with his cancer, he was so light that she could pick him up. She could pick him up like right off the sheet. So I remember feeling, upset about that in a way watching it. So Rambo sadly gives his condolences, and he tosses his black book, like his address book, into their fireplace upon leaving. Aimlessly with nowhere left to turn, he wanders off along the countryside. And seeing this intro again, with the opening titles and Rambo approaching us, reminds me again of the first time I saw this movie. I thought that shot was bizarre as an opening piece. But it helped to draw me in. It's really great cinematography. It's just one shot, like a minute shot of just Rambo approaching us. And I remember seeing the look on Sly's face during him and Delmore's wife's conversation, and remembering back to it now, that was really impressed with Sly's acting. Even from a child's standpoint. So, moving on, we go from blue to gray skies, which is a nice little cinematographic nod to the mood of the film and the transgressions that are about to follow. Rambo marches the highway looking lost within his mind, somewhat hardened, and happens upon the small town of Hope, Washington, played by Hope Canada. And a little deeper into town, we meet Sheriff Teasel, who comes off pretty berating, exiting his high throne of the police station out to his cruiser, poking fun even at passers-by, even insulting a civilian at one point. So we can see that he thinks this town is in fact his, and he's a bit big for his britches, so to speak, and he pulls up to Rambo, automatically starts an opposing stature with him. And the character acting here is really great. Just like back at the Barry residence. Sly can tell a lot without speaking, and it's a plus to his credit. And Denny Teasel is a great matchup for that. And right from the get-go, when these two meet, Teasel is abusive with his authority, and Rambo, in his own uncertainty, gets himself into quite the situation. That Teasel imposes further by warning Rambo not to return to town, even after Rambo asks if he can stop somewhere to eat. Teasel gives him this long speech and pretty much runs him out of town without running him out of town. But soon enough, he runs him out of town, because he sternly drops Rambo off in the outskirts of town. Teasel is somewhat insulted when Rambo walks back across the bridge behind him and toward town again, actually. And before Rambo does, however, there's a moment of his quick decision. There's a bell that tolls, and it's somewhat symbolic or symbolically, and I would think that has something to do with the original intended ending for the movie. Anyway, Rambo pops his collar, welcomes the almost cued rainfall. One could imagine that Rambo, calling Teasel's bluff to maybe get locked up overnight for shelter at one point, as a way out of the storm. But then again, the Rambo we all, have come to know and love, wouldn't really be affected by weather. I would also like to point out at this point that I couldn't help but notice that the cinematography has a great Canadian film feel to it, like the film. And I love that. Normally American movies look more American, and even when they film them in Canada, they still look American. So that was great to notice, that it looks a little more Canadian. Because, I find that Canadian movies do have quite the different look to them. So yeah, most of the things I noticed like that, I noticed on my first watch. My siblings watched a ton of movies when I was young, so I guess it comes somewhat naturally. And yeah, let's move on. So after Teasel puts Rambo in his place for inquiring, about a place to eat, and ditches him out of town, 30 miles from Portland, which is the next town, Rambo he decides to take up the challenge and, walk past the bridge, on coming back to Teasel, in instigation. And a visage of his feral persona begins to manifest for us, and we can see that things are not quite what they seem to be, as Rambo starts his descent back into war mode. So Rambo crosses back over the bridge, and Teasel whips back and starts addressing him firmly. And Rambo, of course, ignores his calls, and Sly closes his hand into what appears to be like a defying fist. And for a second, it looks like an explosion is on the horizon. It's just superb acting. And the stern face he gives Teasel after, Teasel's grabbing at his arm is pretty scary, and I love how the lights from the cruiser reflect off of them. And again, without things being said, how Rambo really pierces visually with his facial expressions at this point. So Teasel orders Rambo to stand down and obey, almost pulling his handgun on him, saying, now you're going to put your hands on that car, and either way you do it, you decide. And maybe even a bit foolish, it might seem, because we can see that, in fact, Teasel is quick to draw, and it's in a threatening manner. And John Jay finally does, what Teasel wants, and after a frisking, we are introduced to his trusty aviator knife. Teasel asks why it's on Rambo's person, to which he replies, hunting. Then Teasel, says, don't be a wise guy. What do you hunt with a knife? To which Rambo replies, name it. It's unknowing to Teasel that the fuse is lit. And I love the looks shared between them in the scene. You know, yeah, I wish it was kind of like a flashback, like in the book, how Rambo goes over numerous disarming tactics. That would have been cool to see, but unfortunately, it's not here. But it's a great reason to read the book. Anyway, so Rambo's brought to the precinct, and he's berated and belittled by officers standing by, and we meet Arthur Galt, Lester, and Mitch. And there's a reference to the paint scaffold. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the irony from the book, because in the book, they joke about the sheriff's office being repainted, and in the commentary on the DVD and in the documentary, they talk about how the paint scaffolding was there and just lying around, so they incorporated it into the feature film. So Rambo watches Arthur Galt joke about him, with a nice little line about his aviator, saying, "What are you hunting, elephant?" And then Galt slices a piece of paper in half with the knife, and it seems like Rambo really wants to grab that knife. Now this is where the movie begins to turn, just barely 10 minutes in, and usually movies nowadays would drag out all this character development to half an hour or maybe 40 minutes of the feature, and that's one of the things that makes this movie work so great. Is a great feature that it's so fast paced and tightly cut, it's such a tightly cut film, and it wastes no time, and goes, strictly straightforward. Like having to learn about Rambo simultaneously as the acting unfolds keeps the viewer entertained and interested, and it doesn't feel laggy. Nowadays, so many great formulas for character development seem a bit of a lost cause, because they spend almost the whole first half acting, or the first act, setting up the character. So I believe the flow of this makes for a great flowing style for the viewer. Like we learn about Rambo through the action itself, cutting back and cutting back and cutting back, so it doesn't seem like it's we're getting scenes of filler. It actually seems like everything has a nice purpose. So now we're going to see things start to unravel, and we're going to start to see the inevitable boiling point of the main character. And now things are going to start taking a drastic turn for the worse for so many.